The concept of gender dysphoria we generally associate with the idea that you don't identify with the gender that you've been assigned at birth or with the sex you've been assigned at birth. But the word dysphoria, I thought it might have something to do with phoria meaning form, but apparently phoria just means to carry. Like Lucifer means he who bears the light, he who carries the light. So dysphor, faire, means to carry. So I bear a bad load. I carry something malignant. Gender dysphoria, carrying a bad gender. And I was trying to think about that term. There's a lot of confusion that I have concerning gender, because when I read Camille Paglia, she said, the female is solipsistic. The female is self-contained. This female is within herself. The female is harmonious with nature. The female is nature. And so the female doesn't need civilization. The female doesn't need abstraction. The female doesn't need artifice. The female doesn't need mathematics and science, and the female doesn't need to understand nature, because the female is nature. And understanding is really the process of dissection. It's an attack, it's a defense, it's a war, it's a struggle. The female is not at war with nature. The female does not struggle against nature, because the female is nature. The female is harmonious with nature. The female is, this is Paglia saying this, if we're to construct an object-subject duality, the female is the object. And because the female is the object, there's no conflict. There's no problem. The female is just looking inward. The female doesn't need to look outward and discover the universe and understand what's going on. The female is totally self-contained. She's concerned not with moral principles or axioms. She's concerned with just whatever immediately surrounds her. What is the social scene that she's situated in? She's going to do some kind of evaluation and just fit. She's going to be like water into a vessel. She's not going to challenge the social scene. She's going to be an authoritarian. In the sense, she's going to seek out authority and follow authority. This is her mating strategy. This is her reproductive strategy. This is her way of interacting with the world. Whereas the male, he's got his principles, he has his axioms. He's choosing females based on that. He's creating the female. Adam creates Eve. Eve is created from Adam. The rib is a phallic symbol. Oh, why is God taking the rib? Well, because you can't say God then from Adam's phallus made Eve. But that's the metaphor. The metaphor is that his phallus, his sexual will, his sexual desire, his erotic desire, is what creates the form of woman. See, male chimpanzees and female chimpanzees are somewhat differentiated, but we don't view female chimpanzees as more graceful or beautiful or sexual or anything like that. The female human is a unique construction of the male human psyche. And that's true for every human type. So men who want that type that is in Europe they're called the Hottentot figures, this enormous, gargantuan, overflowing cornucopia, this bodily exuberance, this oversized mammaries, these oversized buttocks. That's one type that is created. It is not self-creating, but it was created by the male desire for that. Whereas on the other hand, the slender, gracile, there's many types of forms out there. But the idea is that they're all created by the male mind. Pursuing these types of females creates a selective pressure, which then, in the same way that we have male peacocks have their display. They have their display because female peacocks select male peacocks on the basis of their plumage. And so their plumage grows out of control, beautiful and huge and giant. That what we're saying here is that men select women, men create women. Women are just another artifice from the mind of man, or the desire of man. So all of that being said, then, we should expect that the woman is the thing in herself, whereas the man is abstraction and contemplation and analysis. and he is distance, and he is alienation, and he is atomization. He is dissection. So when we talk about the moon, we would have to talk about the man, because the moon is not the thing in itself. The sun is the thing in itself, right? The sun is the thing in itself which just is. It just simply is. It creates in a dumb way. It doesn't know what it's creating. It's just putting out energy and something's happening. That's how females are. They simply exist. They get impregnated. They give birth. And there's no artifice. There's no thinking. There's no consciousness involved in that process. It's a primordial, primeval process of creation. Whereas the male creation is intentional and conscious and civilized and abstracted. So we would have to say that the sun is feminine because its creation process is just totally primordial, primeval, the thing in itself. Whereas the moon has differentiation. The moon has stages. The moon, and you look at like a lunar calendar versus a solar calendar, the moon is consistent. The moon is mathematical. The moon rules over the tides. The moon rules over, theoretically, the menstrual cycle. So we can see the way in which the moon rules over those feminine things of the earth, where the sun generates the feminine things of the earth. It generates the plants. It generates, life. And then the moon regulates life. The moon takes that which is already created by the sun, created by that process of primordial preconscious birth. The feminine sun creates the life on earth. The moon regulates the life on earth. The moon says, oh, here's when the tides will go up and down. It's not creating the water. It's not a demiurge. It's not like a primordial demiurge that's creating life, but it's taking life that already exists and it's manipulating that life and it's civilizing that life. It's taking life building blocks that already exist, and it's bringing them together in a cohesive way that results in complexity. So the moon is complexity. And so that's why I associate the moon with the male, because the male is complexity. But there are problems with this analysis. Because when we look at how men and women actually act, and the two extreme psychological types are autism and schizophrenia. Now, maybe this is a fallacious dichotomy among many others that I've made. But let's look at it. Autism is the world of image. Autism is obsession with image. Autism is the idea of the thing in itself. The autistic person, or autistic traits, are those which tend toward the love of the thing in itself. You love the train in itself. You don't love it for its practicality. You don't love it because it's useful. You don't love it because it's going to get you laid. You love the thing in itself. You love the train. And the male love of the female body is a kind of autistic or erotic fixation. That's not something you might hear very commonly. I'm sure someone else has thought of it before. But it is a kind of an imagery, autistic, erotic fixation on the body. Is the female body in itself useful? Well, theoretically, from a Darwinian perspective, blah, 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 blah. But when a man watches porn, that's not a Darwinian process of selection. That's an imagery process, which is ultimately, you could say, this imagery process, the autism as a psychological mind state, all of this came about through a process of Darwinian selection. But ultimately, as it exists in the present day, it is purely an admiration of the thing in itself, an obsession with the thing in itself, a fetishization of the thing in itself. So pure autism is the love of the image, the love of the thing in itself. Which again, if we're saying the word the thing in itself, I have to look at the moon, or I have to look at the sun. Now I'm mixing myself up. I have to look at the sun, because I look at the sun, I say the sun is the thing in itself. If we're looking cosmologically at, astrological signs, or we're looking at objects that can be seen from the earth that are out in space, we're looking at the sun. The sun is the thing in itself. The sun is not caused by the planets. The sun is not complex in its nature. It is a monad. The sun is it is a point in the sky, and it does not move. It is stationary. We go around the sun. Now, the ancients believed that the sun moved. It was a chariot, blah, blah, blah. But the sun is really stationary, and the sun is not complex. The sun doesn't have phases. The sun does not have a retrograde motion. The sun, I guess you could say, it changes with the seasons. It changes with the seasons, so there might be some change there. But basically, if I look at all the objects in the night sky, there is nothing more stationary than the sun. There's nothing more predictable than the sun. There's nothing more thing in itself than the sun. The sun is this monad. It's this point. Everything else is whirring around, engaging in retrograde motions. Some of the planets have their own moons. The moon, of course, has its own phases. The moon, of course, impacts the tides in a sophisticated way that the sun is chaotic. The sun, it's throwing out solar flares. You can't predict solar storms. You can't predict solar flares. The sun is just this chaotic thing in itself. It's not logical. It's not reasonable. It's pre-rational. The sun is a thing in itself. So when I say autism, I mean the word automatic. Auto in the Greek means the self. So autism means self-absorbed, self-obsessed, the thing in itself, not concerned with the complexity of the matter, not concerned with the meaning of it, not concerned with the social context, just the thing in itself. So then we start to say, okay, if autism is the extreme masculine mind, and the sun is autistic, I'm sorry, the sun is autistic, we're going with this, then we're saying that autism, masculinity, the sun, they're all correlated. Whereas females are sophisticated, they're more toward the schizophrenic, and they're more concerned with creating associations that don't have a basis in reality. And so they're concerned with the word, they're concerned with, strangely enough, they're concerned with logos. They're concerned with feelings and implications and hidden meanings, whereas the extreme masculine mind just says, look, I like playing with trains. I like playing Minecraft. You say, well, what's the social purpose there? What are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to get attention from other people? Are you trying to pursue a mating strategy? Like, what are you doing here? It's like, no, I'm just playing Minecraft. I'm just playing with trains. The autistic mind is obsessed with the thing in itself. Okay, but the woman or female psychology, or in the extreme opposite direction, is never concerned with the thing in itself. A woman doesn't want a new car because she likes cars. A woman doesn't want a new house because she likes houses. The woman doesn't want a strong man because she likes strong men. The woman never wants the thing in itself. The woman always wants the thing in a relative sense. And so because of the man's objectivity, he can truly experience the thing in itself or desire the thing in itself, whereas the woman never desires the thing in itself. The woman always desires the thing relative to something else, relative to a social context. The woman desires, maybe like let's say a Paleolithic time, the woman desires the man with the sharpest spear, not because she's autistically obsessed with sharp spears. The woman wants the man with the sharpest spear because he is relatively a better spear maker than the other men. The woman wants the man with a Lamborghini not because she is autistically obsessed with the image of the Lamborghini. The woman wants the man with the Lamborghini because his car is relatively better than the other men in the average. So in this sense, the female psychology, the female mating strategy is always subjective rather than objective. The man is objective. Again, the object, the sun, the thing in itself. The man is objective in that he uses the principle of peras, of limiting, and he looks at women and he says, I have a standard of beauty. You have to have a symmetrical face. You have to have the right feminine proportions. You have to have the right curvature, whatever. The man, and it differs from man to man, but each man in his own metaphysical space of beauty standards, which, on average conform to something like looking like, you're skinny in the right places, you have the hourglass figure, we know all those rules. But there are rules that say this is an objectively attractive woman, And it's not relative to other women. So if you, now this isn't technically true in terms of sexuality, if you put a man on an island alone with an ugly woman, he's probably going to find that woman more and more attractive over time. Similarly, men who go to prison, who might not engage in same gender relations, they go into prison, they end up doing that just because their sexuality has no output, and so they're starting to map their sexuality upon the closest objects to the female form, which end up being these feminine men. So that's something that happens. I mean, we know animals, dogs hump legs. We know this happens in the animal kingdom where, animals are supposed to seek out a mating partner, but sometimes they just end up, engaging in relations with objects or animals of another species, which is not intended, but it's you might say an accidental byproduct. Or a mistake, but in the case of men tend to be a little more objective in their beauty standards, whereas women tend to be a little bit more subjective. This is the popular conception. Now, there's a study out of the Netherlands which says that male preference is just as much determined by physical characteristics as female preference. So, the latest research might contradict this intuition. But the intuition is that men are choosing women based off objective imagery features. That there is a rule that we have inside our head. This is what the ideal woman should look like. This woman approximates that a Platonic ideal. Therefore, I am attracted to that woman. Whereas a woman is attracted to men purely on the basis of their relative social status, which is indicated by adjacent objects such as the Lamborghini, such as the sharp spear, such as a title that they might have within an organization. So if your title is janitor, women's not going to be attracted to you. If your title is CEO, women will be attracted to you. So this idea that you can simply change a title, logos, word, you can just change a title, you can change something within a relativistic context. Of course, all language is relativistic, it's schizophrenic, it's symbolic, it's representational. Language is not a thing in itself. Poetry tries to square this circle and create a thing in itself out of language using puns and rhymes and what are all those poetic terms I'm forgetting about? The rhythm and the cadence of the poetry, whatever, trying to connect the morpheme with the phoneme and create a thing in itself out of language. But ultimately, language is not a thing in itself. Language is referential. And so this is why, as confusing as this is why I associate women with logos. If we're to use, again, we're referencing two schemes here. We're saying the first half of this video where we said that obviously the woman is the sun, obviously the man is the moon, this is so obvious, and that's sort of following Camille Paglia. Of course, she would disagree. She would say that, the man is solar Apollonian, the female is lunar Chthonian. But I'm saying, well, if we're really rigorous here, we're going to find out that the woman is the sun and the man is the moon. The woman is the thing in herself, whereas the man is the manipulator of existing nature. He's not the demiurge. He is the watchmaker. He's taking nature, dissecting nature, making something out of nature in an oppositional way. The moon is lit up by the sun in the same way that the genius is created through the primordial action of his mother giving birth to the genius. She has no conscious machination or Machiavellianism in it, but he is created. The moon is created through the sun. Man is created through the woman. The sun is chaotic. Woman is chaotic. Man is differentiated. The moon is differentiated through its phases. So that's the first scheme that we could use. And I'm looking at it as a legitimate scheme, especially if we're looking at the role of the priest and the merchant. This makes sense to me. But of course, the classical conception is that the sun, Marduk, is the warrior dissecting nature. Nature is lunar, the moon, the titans, the giants, darkness versus light. So there's that classical scheme. And then we're getting into a different scheme here where we're saying essentially the sun is autistic and therefore masculine. It's the thing in itself. Whereas the moon is logos. The moon is word. The moon is referential. The moon is symbolic. The moon is a reflection. If we're to say, with Plato's vision, that the sun is the pure thing in itself, the Platonic form, which shines upon the moon then reflects that light. That light which reflects from the moon is not the true Platonic form in itself, but it's a linguistic reference to the thing in itself. That's logos, that's the word. So when we talk about rules and dichotomies and language and abstraction, that is all lunar. And that is the realm of the feminine, because whereas the man is erotically fixated, autoerotically fixated, he is fetishizing the image in itself, the woman doesn't care about the image. The woman cares about relative social status, therefore she only cares about words. She only cares about language. A female is obsessed with language in the linguistic space. She cares what people think about her, what people say about her. Men don't care about this. Men care about beauty and aesthetics and the thing in itself, and they care about, they're like, I don't care what people say about me, I'm going to do my way. Now, of course, I'm stating these things as absolutes to simplify the model, but of course we know men who are obsessed with social status. We also know women who are obsessed with aesthetics. So this is not a biological categories that I'm creating in a hard and fast way. There might be a biological correlation in genetics, in hormones, whatever. That's all possible. I'm not a scientist, so I can't, it's not my strong suit, but what I can say is that we can imagine the masculine and the feminine. I mean, even the left wing accepts this. When someone says, I was born into a man's body, but I feel more like a female, they're actually reifying the concept of gender, which people like Sloterdijk criticize that and say, no, you're reifying the concept of gender by saying you're a man who wants to be a woman. Aren't you then saying that male and female are real concepts that should be given weight and that have importance? And some people have criticized that and said, no, we should do away with the concept of gender entirely and become completely androgynous. That's an argument that actually harkens back to the Greeks, as Evola references, where he says that there's a primordial idea that in the Golden Age everyone was androgynous and we didn't have these disputes over gender. It was a completely monastic, that's a Freudian slip, it was a completely monadic conception of gender in which humanity was united and harmonious and reproduced autosexually. So there was no lust, there was no eros, there was no corrupting force as we see in the Garden of Eden, where knowledge of good and evil leads to the seduction of Eve by the serpent, etc., etc. So just to kind of close this up, we had the moon in this. So the first one, I guess we would call we would say that there is a demiurge and a clockmaker dichotomy, where the demiurge is obviously feminine, being the sun, and the clockmaker is the moon, who then takes the energy of the sun, reflects it, and changes. And we even see this when the moon eclipses the sun, right? So the moon is obscuring the sun. The moon is a secondary characteristic of the sun, and therefore the moon is headed toward abstraction. So we might call this the demiurgic astrological view of gender. Has to be that the sun is feminine, the moon is masculine. But if we go to an autistic schizophrenic analysis of linguistics, then we're looking at a situation where the sun is clearly masculine because the man is concerned with the thing itself, the image, and then the woman is concerned with the social context. And so really, the woman is concerned with language, she's concerned with logos, she's concerned with abstraction. So these two ways of viewing these astrological gendered signs are completely opposite, but they do have a kind of tautological inner consistency to them, which is neat. It's neat to flip these back and forth. The third aspect I'd like to talk about, you might call the neutral gender or the animal gender. Are animals masculine or feminine? That's a question that we might typically think, oh, well, the animal is feminine because the animal is in harmony with nature, and therefore the animal is just going by its instincts. Women just go off their instincts. They don't have any complexity or abstraction to them. They don't have consciousness in the way that men do. They're more concerned about the context than axioms and principles and Platonic forms. So really, animals are closer to women than they are to men. But on the other hand, so that would be that would be the idea that logos is masculine. Animals are far from logos, therefore they must be closer to women because women are farther from logos. So it's kind of a chain of being where men are at the top and they're closest to logos, and then women are in the middle farther from logos, and then animals are at the bottom farthest from logos. So that's the first scheme. That is the, we might, what do we call that? The demiurgic scheme of gender relations. That's the first scheme. And then the second scheme, which agrees again with the classical model that the sun is masculine, the moon is feminine. The second model is the autistic schizophrenic model, where it says that women are actually supremely logos-oriented in terms of not being rule-oriented, but there is social rules. They're perceptive of social rules. Logos not meaning rule necessarily peras, but logos meaning word. Logos meaning linguistics. So again, there's a semantic confusion here where I'm using logos to mean peras, rule, and then I'm using logos to mean language and relativism. So clearly women are supremely relativistic, they're social, they're concerned with your title, they're concerned with the context, they're concerned with what their friends think, whereas men are concerned with the image in itself. And if we look at animals then, animals are not linguistic, they're concerned with the image in itself. They're simply acting, reacting. They don't have a consciousness. They're not, manipulating principles to conform to social rules or something. That women are engaged in this high level, you might call it social intelligence. They're engaged in this high level, sometimes people negatively refer to it as social manipulation or emotional manipulation. They're hyper aware and hyper conscious of their image. They're hyper aware, hyper conscious of social cues and things like that. Whereas men tend to be a little dumber in that respect. Men tend to, in the extreme masculine, the autistic tends to just say, I don't care about social rules. I'm just concerned with the image in itself, which seems to be closer to the animal world, or the way that we conceive of animals as not being sophisticated or Machiavellian. We would really say here that the female is a Machiavellian lunar figure who is complete. Her world is completely made up of the relative world of language, whereas the masculine warrior type, he doesn't care about relativism. He doesn't care about language. He's concerned with the thing in itself. Does it work? Doesn't it work? The mechanic, the engineer. And so this is the alternate form of the clockmaker, not the clockmaker as a Machiavellian who's dissecting the nature of the sun, but the clockmaker as someone who's very straightforward and methodical and concerned with the thing in itself. And therefore you would say that men are closer to animals, which certainly from the feminine perspective, men really are closer to animals. From the masculine perspective, women are closer to animals, but from the feminine perspective, men are bestial. Oh, you're such a brute. You're a boar. You're like an animal. There's animalistic men with their violence, right? So, this is all interesting, the dichotomy between men are clearly physically stronger, and therefore we tend to think of them as more violent than women, although that's not technically true. If we look at statistics, women tend to just hit their romantic partners more. It might not hurt as much because they're women, whereas if a man strikes a woman, it's going to hurt more. But women do tend to initiate violence more, slapping, pushing, that sort of thing. But our popular conception is that men are more violent because they are stronger, and they also tend to produce more genius, high IQ, abstraction. So it's like if we're looking at the realm of physical violence, clearly men are more animalistic. If we're looking at the realm of abstraction, clearly men are farther from animals than women if we're to accept that prejudice. These two systems, it's interesting. We might even call the first one the masculine system of the moon, self-identification with the moon, saying that, men, we are distant from the sun, we are distant from nature. Man wants to distance himself from the nature. So the masculine view is that, and this doesn't quite make sense to me because the classical view was made up by men, and they conceived of themselves in that way. we gotta end the video. See you next time. Bye-bye.